Imagine a time when every single bank in the nation, from the tiny local branch right up to the biggest Wall Street institutions, was just shut, closed down.
Yeah, no withdrawals, no loans, no business as usual at all.
And this wasn't some kind of hypothetical, right?
Yeah.
This was the actual reality in the United States. Early March 1933,
Yeah.
the whole financial system was just teetering on the edge.
On the brink. And the president, who had just been inaugurated, had to take immediate, pretty drastic action.
It's almost impossible, I think, to really get your head around the scale of that paralysis today.
It really is. I mean, a crisis so deep, it basically shaped the next decade, forced leaders into some extraordinary choices.
And those choices are exactly what we're diving into today. Our mission really is to understand the incredible measures taken to try and stabilize the American banking system during what they called a supreme emergency.
Yeah, we'll be pulling apart the actual text, the language of the laws, the president's proclamation, even the really heated, urgent debates in Congress, all from March 1933.
We want to uncover the core mechanics of what they did, understand the stakes, which were incredibly high, and actually hear from the voices who were right there, shaping the response.
And to do that, we've got some really fantastic primary source material. We're using excerpts from the New Deal documented EEON.pdf.
Right.
Specifically, the Congressional Record from the House, dated March 9th, 1933, and FDR's Proclamation 2039, the one declaring the bank holiday, from March 6th.
This is the raw stuff,
Whoa.
The actual words that define the crisis, and really the start of the New Deal financial reform.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's start right there, at the precipice. March 6th, 1933. President Roosevelt declares this nationwide bank holiday. And like I said, not just a long weekend, a total mandatory shutdown. Monday, March 6th, right through to Thursday, March 9th. What was the immediate justification? Why do something so sweeping?
Well, the proclamation itself, it lays it out pretty starkly. It talks about heavy and unwarranted withdrawals of gold and currency.
Right, people pulling money out.
Yeah, for the purpose of hoarding. And also continuous and increasingly extensive speculative activity abroad in foreign exchange, which was leading to severe drains on the nation's stocks of gold.
So basically, panic at home, speculation abroad, and the country's gold reserves just pouring out.
Pretty much. And the proclamation states these conditions created a national emergency. That was the key phrase.
And the immediate impact. Just absolute suspension.
Total suspension. The proclamation, it explicitly said no institution could pay out, export, earmark, or permit the withdrawal or transfer of any gold or silver coin or bullion or currency.
Or do anything else, like pay deposits or make loans.
Nothing. They effectively just slammed the brakes on the entire financial system.
So what happened if, say, someone wanted to deposit new money during the shutdown? Was that locked up too?
That's a really crucial detail. The proclamation, while it shut everything down, it also immediately gave new authority to the Secretary of the Treasury. With the president's approval, the secretary could allow some very specific limited banking functions and, importantly, authorize special trust accounts for new deposits.
Ah, interesting.
Yeah, so these new deposits, they'd be unrestricted, kept totally separate from all the frozen funds. The idea was to allow some cash to flow, without people fearing it would just get trapped like the rest.
Kind of a psychological move as well as practical.
Definitely. A step to try and rebuild a little bit of trust, even mid-crisis.
And just to be clear, when they said banking institutions, they meant everything, right?
Oh, yeah. Super broad definition. Federal Reserve banks, national banks, state banks, trust companies, savings banks, even things like building and loan associations, credit unions. They were trying to cover all bases.
An all-encompassing halt.
Yeah.
So where did Roosevelt even find the authority to do something this huge this fast? Did he need Congress first?
Well, that's what's fascinating. He actually dusted off an old, somewhat obscure provision, Section 5B of the Act of October 6, 1917.
From World War I era.
Exactly. Originally a wartime measure, but it gave the president surprisingly broad powers to regulate foreign exchange transactions and also the export, hoarding, melting, or earmarking of gold or silver, even in peacetime.
So the authority was already there, just waiting.
It seems so. It allowed him to act immediately, which was absolutely vital given how fast things were spiraling. No time to wait for new legislation at that exact moment.
Okay, so the proclamation basically stops the bleeding, sets the stage. A huge move in itself. But Congress still needed to act, right? To back this up, put more lasting measures in place.
Absolutely. And the Congressional Record for March 9th, just 3 days later, it paints this picture of incredible speed and pressure. The Banking Emergency Relief Act being considered, well, it was extraordinary.
A real snapshot of government under extreme duress.
It really is. You have Mr. Stegall, who is a key figure pushing this, noting the supreme emergency confronting the Congress and the country. And he argued the House had to act without the delay incident to the organization of the Committee on Banking and Currency. Basically saying, forget the usual process. We don't have time.
No kidding. No time for committees. And wasn't the president directly involved in pushing Congress?
He was. The record says members, including the leadership, were called into a conference by the president. He discussed the bill with them and made a direct request that the measure be expedited in every possible manner.
Expedited is one word for it. How long did they actually debate this massive piece of legislation?
Get this. 40 minutes. Total.
40.
40 minutes. 20 for the minority, 20 for the majority. The bill was just read aloud from the clerk's desk.
Wait, they didn't even have printed copies.
For most members, no printed copies were available. And maybe most incredibly, it wasn't subject to amendment. They had to vote yes or no on what they just heard read out loud.
That is unbelievable. Can you imagine voting on something that fundamental that you've literally only just heard with no chance to change it?
The reactions from some members really capture that shock. Mr. Luce, from the minority, he basically said he couldn't grasp the full meaning of that bill by listening to its reading, having had no intimation whatever beforehand of what it contains.
Understandable.
And Mr. McFadden said something similar. The first opportunity I had to know what this legislation is was when it was read from the clerk's desk. It just highlights the immense pressure, the gamble, really, that Congress took.
Wow. It's hard to wrap your head around that level of legislative speed today. Okay, so let's unpack what was in this act they passed so quickly. These provisions were foundational. Title II, for instance, brought in something called conservatorships.
Right. Conservatorships for national banks and banks that were members of the Federal Reserve System.
And what did that mean exactly?
It gave the controller of the currency, with the okay from the Treasury Secretary, the power to appoint a conservator for any bank that was, quote, not for the moment in condition to resume complete operation.
So like putting a struggling bank into a sort of protective custody.
That's a good way to put it. The conservator's job was to preserve the assets to the protection of depositors and the public. But crucially, the law said they had no power to proceed with final liquidation.
So it was about stabilizing, triaging, not immediate shutdown.
Exactly. Put it on life support, assess its health, maybe get it ready to reopen if possible, not just let it collapse. Although, interestingly, state-chartered banks were left out of the specific part that was left to state authorities.
Okay. Then we get to Title III, and this seems really innovative. Injecting capital using preferred stock.
Yes, this was a big one. National banks could now issue this new type of stock, preferred stock, with the controller's approval and a majority vote from existing shareholders, though new banks didn't need the shareholder vote.
How is this different from regular bank stock? What made it preferred?
Well, several things. Holders got cumulative dividends capped at 6%. But here's the really key part. They shall not be held individually responsible for any debts, and shall not be liable for assessments to restore impairments in the capital.
So none of that dreaded double liability that common stockholders faced, where they could lose their investment and be forced to pay more.
Exactly. That double liability had wiped out countless investors. This new preferred stock eliminated that risk for its holders. Plus, if the bank did get liquidated, preferred stockholders got their initial investment back, plus dividends, before common stockholders got anything.
Making it a much safer, much more attractive way to get new money into struggling banks.
Precisely. It was designed to lure capital back in when banks desperately needed it.
And the government itself played a role here through the Reconstruction Finance Corporation, the RFC.
Yes, its role was massively expanded. If a bank needed this capital infusion, the Treasury Secretary, with the president's okay, could ask the RFC to actually buy this new preferred stock.
So the government became an investor.
Or make loans secured by it, yes. And this wasn't just for national banks. The act explicitly allowed the RFC to do this for state banks and trust companies, too. That was crucial for those institutions not covered by other federal bits.
Right.
And naturally, the RFC's own borrowing power was increased significantly, so it actually had the funds to do all this. The government was stepping in as a sort of investor of last resort.
Okay, moving on to Title IV. This expanded the Federal Reserve's powers and also dealt with currency itself. What changed with Fed lending?
There was a major amendment, Section 10 of the Federal Reserve Act. It allowed Federal Reserve banks, in exceptional and exigent circumstances, to lend money to member banks based on their time or demand notes secured to the satisfaction of such Federal Reserve Bank.
What does that mean in practical terms?
Well, traditionally, the Fed could only lend against very specific, high-quality, easily sellable assets, what they called eligible paper for rediscounting. This change meant the Fed could now lend against a much wider range of collateral, basically anything the Fed bank deemed satisfactory security.
So more flexibility for banks needing emergency loans, even if their assets weren't top tier.
Exactly. A vital lifeline for banks whose assets might have been sound long-term but weren't liquid enough for the old rules. It was broader, more flexible lending power, though it was temporary, set to expire in March 1934 unless the president extended it.
And then there was the really big one in Title IV, creating a new type of currency, Federal Reserve banknotes.
Yes, Section 401 amendment. This was quite something. It allowed the Federal Reserve banks themselves to issue circulating notes in blank, duly registered, and countersigned.
Okay. How did that work? What backed these notes?
They could be issued by depositing specific collateral with the U.S. Treasury. Two main types: direct obligations of the United States, basically government bonds which could back notes equal to their face value, or they could use notes, drafts, bills of exchange, or bankers' acceptances. Essentially commercial loans and IOUs held by the banks which could back notes up to 90% of their estimated value.
So these notes could be backed by government debt or even business loans, not just gold. How are they different from the regular Federal Reserve notes, the greenbacks?
That's the critical distinction. Regular Federal Reserve notes were, at the time, primarily backed by gold held by the Fed. These new Federal Reserve banknotes didn't need that direct gold backing in the same way. They were technically subject to a 5% gold reserve requirement, like the old national banknotes, but the primary backing was the collateral deposited the government bonds or commercial paper. This gave the government a way to massively increase the money supply, inject liquidity, even if its gold reserves were low or tied up.
A tool for serious currency expansion, then.
Oh, absolutely. Mr. Stiegel, in the debate, called it a plan for constructive expansion of the currency.
Was there worry about how much money this could create? Did anyone put a number on it?
There definitely was discussion. Mr. Britton asked if the expansion might run to $20 million, which was an astronomical sum then.
Wow.
But Mr. Stiegel pushed back, saying nobody knew the limit. He insisted it wasn't arbitrary expansion, but designed to be elastic. It would only expand as much as banks needed it to protect depositors and support trade. So demand-driven, in theory.
Opening a spigot without quite knowing how wide it could go.
And you get a really striking perspective on this from Congressman Patman. He supported the bill, but he was very blunt afterwards about these new notes.
What did he say?
He stated flatly that this new money will not have 1 penny of gold coverage behind it because it is really not needed.
Really? No gold needed at all?
In his view, no. He argued, we do not need gold to back our internal currency. We only need gold to settle our balances with foreign countries. He believed the notes would be backed by the credit of the nation, essentially a mortgage on everything owned by the American people.
A very different philosophy of money.
Completely.
Yeah.
He even suggested using this new currency issuing power to retire some of the national debt held by banks, claiming it would save $700 million a year in interest payments. It shows this profound debate happening right then. Should money be tied to gold or to national credit and productive capacity?
Which brings us right into those immediate reactions and the sort of underlying philosophies clashing here. The emergency forced the bill through, but you can really feel the tension, the different ideas about money, banks, government power.
Absolutely palpable. You had the strong proponents of just acting fast, like Mr. Stiegel, framing it as just one step. He quoted a poem, actually. Heaven is not reached at a single bound, but we build the ladder by which we rise, and we mount to its summit round by round.
Seeing it as just the necessary first rung on the ladder back to stability.
Right. And Mr. Goldsboro echoed that, declaring, in time of storm, there can only be one pilot, the president. He expressed confidence that more would follow deposit insurance, reflating the currency. Trust in leadership was key for them.
And even those with objections to the process often went along because of that trust. Mr. Smith of Washington, for example, said he voted for it, despite procedural concerns, because of these assurances of our great president and our able leaders. A real sense of, we had to do this now.
Yeah, unity in crisis. But then you had another group, The strong advocates for currency expansion, who saw this not just as an emergency measure, but as like the dawn of a new era they'd been wanting.
People who thought the problem was lack of currency.
Exactly. Mr. Rankin, for instance, he said he'd spent 3 years pleading for a controlled expansion of the currency to raise commodity prices. He hailed the bill as the beginning of a new day.
So he saw the new Federal Reserve banknotes as a positive good in themselves.
Yes, as a controlled expansion that would finally make money worth 100 cents again by boosting prices for farmers' wheat, cotton, corn, and land values. He hoped it would lead to permanent laws stabilizing commodity prices. Mr. Busby basically agreed, saying, "We have come to the point where we are willing to endorse in a formal way an executive fiat on this question, willing to let the president just manage the currency."
Wow, but not everyone was cheering. There were some loud critics, weren't there?
Oh, definitely. Mr. McFadden was probably the most scathing. He called the bill a dictatorship over finance in the United States, nothing less than complete control over the banking system.
Strong words. Did he have specific suspicions?
Yeah, he voiced suspicion that the bill itself has been proposed and written by the same influences that are responsible for this financial situation. He basically saw it as the powerful consolidating their power. He even demanded an audit of the Treasuries and the Fed's gold holdings, a real conspiracy theory vibe there.
And others objected more to the process, the lack of deliberation.
Yes, Mr. Lundin was very strong on this. He pointed to the unknown author, the lack of copies, the rushed vote. He predicted, "It seems to me that under this bill, thousands of small banks will be crushed and wiped out of existence.
Concentrating power.
And that money and credit control will be still further concentrated in the hands of those who now hold the power." He pleaded with his colleagues not to abdicate our power to exercise judgment or be swept off our feet by hysteria, a powerful warning about democratic process, even in emergencies.
It's a real tension. There was also an alternative proposed, right? Something about changing the dollar's gold value.
Yes, that came from Mr. McGudgeon. Instead of just creating new currency potentially unbacked by gold, he proposed devaluing the dollar in terms of gold, specifically reducing its gold content by 1/3 from 23.22 grains down to about 15.48 grains.
How would that help?
His calculation was that this would instantly make the existing gold reserves worth more in dollar terms, freeing up about $2 billion in gold, which could then legally back about $5 billion in new currency under the existing rules. He saw it as an orderly way to get the inflation many thought was needed, but keeping it tied directly to gold rather than just, as he saw it, printing currency without any regard for the gold reserve.
So achieving expansion, but through a different mechanism tied to gold, really highlights the fundamental disagreements about how money should work.
Exactly. Even in that crisis moment, you had these deeply different economic philosophies battling it out.
So wrapping this up, what does all this mean for you listening today? I mean, this deep dive, it really reveals how in an extreme national crisis, the U.S. government just implemented these incredibly sweeping, unprecedented financial measures.
Yeah, and it shows that raw tension between the desperate need for speed, for swift action, and the normal democratic process. Plus, the immediate practical challenges. How do you reopen banks? How do you restore shattered confidence?
And this act, passed in that whirlwind, it really did lay the groundwork for so much future financial policy. These tools, conservatorships, preferred stock for banks, new ways for the Fed to inject liquidity, expanding currency in emergencies, many echoes of these remain.
Absolutely, and it reflected these really deeply held, often conflicting beliefs about what money is, what the government's role should be, the very foundation of economic stability. These weren't just technical debates, they were philosophical ones.
So maybe a final thought to leave you with. In a democracy, when you're facing what feels like an existential crisis, is it ever justified to bypass the usual legislative checks and balances for the sake of speed?
And what are the lasting consequences, the ones intended, but also the unintended ones, when emergency powers fundamentally reshape the relationship between the government, the financial system, and, the actual money in your pocket?